My name is Joshua Silva. I am a licensed commercial pilot and flight instructor. I have had a lifelong love of aviation and aerospace, and when growing up I even fancied myself an amateur astronomer. I would drag my family and friends, anybody I could, to every air show I could possibly find in Northern California. I was the only kid you knew, or anybody knew, that knew the various components on aircraft, spacecraft by heart. I absolutely loved anything to do with flying or space. But my love of aviation and aerospace never stopped. I continued studying, had an entire library full of aviation books of various military and civilian aircraft, military history, every aviation campaign and theater in almost any war. I studied religiously, and it was just out of pure passion. Later in life, many years later, I decided to become a pilot. As strange as it may sound, it hadn't occurred to me to become a pilot up to that point. I just simply loved aviation and aerospace, but I decided to become a pilot, and I began attending a prestigious flight academy in the Midwest and attending university at the same time, and to gain a degree in aeronautics and aerospace. Shortly thereafter, I began flying twin turboprop aircraft out of Northern California for several nonprofit organizations, and years after that I found myself flight instructing for various small flight schools, both in California and in Arizona, and then on to large academies that trained for the airlines and even some military flights. Shortly thereafter, I began flying regional business jets, and that's when the story of me finding the topic of flat Earth started. Could the Earth actually be flat? I began to see opinions and arguments that seemed logical, but I heard several arguments, which I now know were most likely disinformation, easily disprovable in the aviation world, but there were some that stuck with me. And so, myself being the way I am, I ran quickly, metaphorically, to my old textbook, and I opened my old textbooks, found them, unpacked them, cracked them all open, and even downloaded brand new copies in PDF form offline of all these books to make sure that nothing had been changed. I thought for certain that I knew exactly what compensation pilots are trained while flying to compensate for the spin or the rotation of the Earth, for instance. As far as falling around a globe, I assumed in my mind would be an aircraft's angle of attack. But upon more study, I found that not to be true. The angle of attack being the angle between the aircraft's flight path and the relative wind, which is something that pilots are very familiar with, and it's the idea that an aircraft has to be slightly pitched up, essentially to stay airborne, or a surface of that aircraft has to be pitched slightly to create a difference in air pressure to hold the aircraft aloft. And that is assumed, or was assumed at that time by myself and other pilots, to be the compensation one would make for falling around a globe while flying, period. But upon further research, I found that this was not the case, and it was not even mentioned anywhere. This compensation was not mentioned anywhere I could find in any resource that I had gone to flight school with. And they were extensive. There were many, many books, especially as one progressed towards the commercial flying side, especially elective courses, especially if you're going to university as I was studying aerospace, then you would assume, and I had assumed, that this was calculated for. The big one that is oftentimes quoted is compensation for Coriolis effect while flying. And this is something I'd even taught my students about, and it's always assumed to be correct. We just assume. We're given the narrative from a young age, and everything is built upon that assumption, upon the theory. And so I thought I had the silver bullet. Coriolis effect. We always calculate for that. Well, as I began to look through the books and to look into the calculations given for Coriolis effect, the narrative began to fall apart even further. I began to see things I didn't notice when I was in school, such as Coriolis effect is actually never calculated for, but is assumed to be a part of wind correction angle. Wind correction angle is one of the many calculations pilots of all kinds make while flying to correct against winds in whatever volume or section of air they're flying through, which it could be from any direction, and you're flying through it, so you have to compensate a certain angle into that wind to hold a straight line. And then the big one is given after that. Well, GPS auto corrects for it. And that sent me down yet another path. GPS auto corrects for it. If it's a satellite-based system, how is it correcting for spin if it's also spinning over the same body? And why are there large gaps in GPS coverage over large oceanic bodies? Do they just turn them off? It's just not worthwhile? There have been enough aviation accidents at sea, very far from shore, that would say otherwise. And if you gave the American taxpayers, the ones funding these satellites that are supposed to track aircraft, the information that, well, we're just shutting them off because it's not worthwhile, those 3 or 4 jets full of hundreds of passengers just have to use other navigation methods such as dead reckoning, which is basically using a stopwatch and guessing to the next checkpoint, essentially. If you were to tell them that, they would be infuriated. So that could not be the case. Coverage was a problem. Even over large and non-densely populated areas, you would lose GPS coverage, even in jets at times. So this began to unravel the thread of satellites and satellite timing, and the fact that many reels of footage show these satellites being launched by balloon rather than by rockets. How the concept of these rockets doesn't even work to make it past the atmosphere, much less leave something in perfect geosynchronous orbit. I actually had the privilege of working a short time at a satellite manufacturing company in Northern California. Got to see the assembly and participate in the assembly of satellites, space-based satellites, or so they were said. There would be small bottles encased in these structures that were encased by another structure. The small bottles were the fuel cells. These fuel cells were incredibly small, smaller than a diver's tank in most cases, much smaller. And this was supposed to be all the fuel that the craft needed to run and operate, as most are not actually electric, they're becoming electric now, and sustain itself in a perfect orbit by just small bursts from its engine or its propulsion system. The narrative began to fall apart. I would continue studying and finding that what I fear to be true is reality, that we have been lied to about just about everything. Upon researching military history and then military training and speaking with military gunners in both the Army and the Marine Corps that I know personally, I would ask them about Coriolis effect. And it was always assumed that, yeah, we compensate for the Earth being, a curve, that it would drop. We calculate for the Earth curvature. But even upon asking and having them look into their materials further and my own personal study, again, it found to be an assumed truth with no actual basis in reality, that they would calculate bullet fall based upon angular velocity, drop, friction, amongst other things, and curvature was supposed to be just corrected along with it, just like flying, wind correction angle corrected for Coriolis effect. My name is Joshua Silva. I am a licensed commercial pilot and flight instructor. I have had a lifelong love of aviation and aerospace, and when growing up I even fancied myself an amateur astronomer.
Number one, I'm a pilot, and when I used to fly out of Long Island towards Nantucket, bottom line here is they're going to give you some type of formula for every 100 miles. They're going to give you some type of XYZ per kilometer squared.
Been in aviation for 21 years, anything from helicopters to aerostats to big birds, little birds, fighter jets, things with engines, no engines, big blades, little blades, compressor blades.
I woke up to the truth of the flat earth, shape of the earth, as an engineer and a pilot.
I'm a merchant marine. I've been sailing 15 years. I graduated from the Paul Hall Maritime Center out of Piney Point, Maryland. I primarily sail on container ships, tankers, drill ships, military cargo vessels, you name it, I can sell on it.
Work experience. I joined the Navy when I was 17 years old. I had a secret security clearance. There's different levels of security clearance. There's like a lower level, then there's a secret, which is what I had.
I'll be providing my in-depth experience of U.S. Navy submarines and how they prove we do not live on a globe Earth. However, due to the nature of my job and the security clearance that I hold, I wish to remain anonymous.
Did you notice any curvature while we were up there?
Curvature? No.
No? There's no curvature?
It's just all flat.
Go on then, let him crack on. I just got one question to ask. Flat or a ball?
Flat or a ball? What's that?
Well, I never feel as breaking round. If we live on a ball, surely we'd have to fly around it. Yeah, it feels like flat or a ball.
Flat. That's a ball. I think it's flat.
Yeah, me too.
Pretty flat to me.
It certainly does, doesn't it? And you've got that flat instrument down there to keep it flat.
Gravity exists.
Gravity is an unproven theory.
No, it's not.
Let's rock and roll. Cheers, fellas. Thank you very much for the flight.
How can we go all the way around them?
All the way around? Because if it's a disc, you go all the way around that way.
Nah.
You
You can go all the way around that way as well.
Alright, that's the captain's about flight time. Look at that instrument behind his wheel to keep himself level at all times. Come on then, boys, let's roll. Cheers, take care. There you have it. One says flat, one says a ball. All the way around? Because if it's a disc, you go all the way around that way.
What it is an airplane that shows what future air travel may look like. Yes, it's almost as wide as a football field is long with just one seat. But just as the Wright brothers couldn't carry passengers, Solar Impulse represents the first steps in solar-powered flight. And to prove its potential, they began flying it around the world, from Abu Dhabi last year, with stops in India and China, then across the vast Pacific. Remember, it has no fuel. It then was on to the United States, hopscotched across America, powered only.
Captain, someone wants to say hi, is that okay?
Oh.
Do you adjust for curvature when you get up to a certain altitude?
Well, yeah, when you see the sun coming up on the horizon, but I don't know if you will.
But the plane stays at an even pitch throughout the whole flight.
Yeah.
So I mean, not too much curvature to account for.
No.
More flat than anything.
Nope, you close your eyes, you won't have a clue.
True. More flat than anything?
What was that?
It's more flat than anything.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Thank you guys. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Research flat Earth.
Are you the pilot? Oh, okay. Am I allowed to say hi? Hey, I just want to say thanks for the smooth flight.
Alright.
I have one question. Is there like a specific angle of downward tilt you have to fly at?
3 degrees.
3 degrees for the curvature of the Earth?
Oh, for the Earth?
Because,
No, we just fly over the troposphere.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you have to keep like kind of going down because?
No, we actually have to nose up. It flies. Yeah.
Really? Because I was reading some stuff on the flat Earth that made a lot of sense. Have you looked into it?
Which one? Sorry?
I was reading a lot of stuff on the flat Earth.
Okay, yeah. True.
It's true?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
alright, cool.
All right.
God bless, brother.
Alright, have a good one.
You too.
G'day guys.
How you going?
Just a fellow PPL.
Oh, yes.
You know,
Yeah,
but yes. Casey, how are you, mate? Pleased to meet you guys. Guys, I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah.
I've been flying, and I've come to the conclusion
Yeah.
there is no curvature. I never allow for curvature. There's no way there's curvature. We're round and flat, aren't we?
Definitely.
We are, aren't we?
Flat as a
Thank
pancake,
you,
mate.
sir.
Flat as a pancake.
And the outer ring is south,
Yeah.
and so north must be in the middle, correct?
Possibly.
That would be the only way that a
Yeah.
magnetic compass works on a flat plane.
Might be onto something there.
Yeah, but you're not having me on. We're random flat, aren't we?
Pancake, mate. Yeah. There you go.
Thank you, man.
No worries.
You made my day.
Just don't know that.
But,
Yeah.
well,
There
you know,
go.
I tell a few people, especially some close mates, even though I'm a pilot, they laugh their heads off at me. They think I'm an absolute nut job.
No.
Hey, thanks, guys.
No worries, mate.
Cheers. Thank you. Because it's just been confirmed by the captain that we are round and flat.
The Earth is flat. The Earth is flat.